I want to thank our library president, Scott Mahenick, and his wife, Jennifer, over there in the corner for the honor of hosting the event. And I want to thank John Linton for supplying us with the sound. And it's great to observe a town spirit here in Stephentown. I also want to thank all of those who willingly volunteered to tell your stories this afternoon. There's a couple here that I invited that haven't showed up yet, so hopefully they'll be on their way. I found this song written by Marcia Cutting in one of the Stephentown publications from the Historical Society, and I thought it might be fitting to read that today. And she entitled the song Stephentown. And it says, I'm up on Round Top Mountain, I'm looking all around, the valley lies below me, and it's in the town. The houses dot the landscape, and trees top every hill. The woods are taking back the land where cows once ate their fill. Stephentown, I live in Stephentown, the only one on earth, so they say. I live here, my friends are here, I wouldn't have it any other way. I see the fire station not far from it, Sykes store. The creamery and the depot are busy anymore. Once farmers brought their cans of milk to meet the train each day. New milk from the remaining few farms by truck is hauled away. Some folks can trace their families back generations here. Some came at first for weekends or summers every year. Some folks fled the city in search of open space. They found that to raise families, this is a perfect place. The town has its motto, the phrase freedom of speech. We try to work together, living what we preach. We've seen new people, different styles, and many points of view, and still we work at common tasks, joining old and new. We celebrate 200 years, our time here as a town. Once there were far more people and a measure of renown. Though now we're off the beaten track, our population's small. The people here are special folks, so I don't mind at all. So that's a tribute to Marcia Cutting. And I think this was written to celebrate the Stephentown's 200th anniversary. Isn't that right, Janet?
I have no clue when she wrote it or why she wrote it. It wasn't too long after she got here.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I have the record. If anybody can play it on the turnstile, you can hear it. I bet you other people here have it too, right?
Yeah. By way of introduction, I'm Norma Lasch, born and raised in Stephentown and lived my first 20 years in this beloved town, then moving to West Stephentown when married. We are just a half mile from the town line of Nassau and Stephentown in Dunham Hollow. When Bill and I were married and moved to the Fire Tower Road in 1959, there was confusion about what town our property was located in. And we had to wait quite some time before we could obtain electrical service, because neither Niagara Mohawk or NYSEC wanted to give us any service. We felt at that time we were living in the pre-Edison era for sure. In fact, the West Stephentown Baptist Church history records that in the original 1829 church building there, half the congregation sat in Stephentown and the other half on the Nassau side, and no one dared to sit in someone else's pew. It's not like that anymore. West Stephentown is my church also, and we don't really care what side of the churches sit on, so you're welcome all. The churches have a rich history in Stephentown. Please take a look later at the pictures. They're located here on the table, and talk to other folks about their memories. You can obtain a copy of the historical booklets available. I believe they're at the Heritage Center. So I believe there's 6 or 7 of those publications, and they have some wonderful pictures in there and stories of bygone days. My dad, Doug Williams, and my mom, Edith, bought the old Very House on Garfield Road, where the former post office and general store was many years ago. The area was called Stephentown Flats. My siblings and I enjoyed playing store in the former part of the building where the old cash register was left behind for our make-believe playtime. Our two-story house was the present Kinderhook house and was remodeled by a nephew of mine who bought it in the 80s after my dad passed away. Please come and take a look at some pictures from my past after the meeting. They're also on the table. Some I found in the Historical Society's publication and some from my childhood and later years. I also have a replica of my second car on display, which is a 55 Ford convertible with a Continental wheel. Mine was pink and black. Back to my story. I was born in 1939 when FDR was president and John Garner was vice president. The life expectancy back then was 59 plus 7 years. So I've outlived that already. One of the music favorites back then in 1939 was the Beer Barrel Polka. Anybody old enough to remember that? And Gone with the Wind was an Academy Award winner. Okay? Let's see. I have many fond memories of growing up in Steventown and hanging out with some of my friends. And we also did swimming in the Kinderhook Creek behind our house. Our friends were Freeling Smith Jr., Margie Carolyn and Donna Hall, Ronnie Arquette Demick, Marina Outwater Saxby, Priscilla Palmer Wentworth, Stella Sweener Huffman, Theo Holt Janito, Barbara Burdick, Gwen Robbins Brown, and Jane Wemple Thomas. I treasured my early school years walking to the Little Red Schoolhouse, now owned by Ruthie Sweener Baker. I recall one day while I was running home for lunch from grade school while chasing one of the Smith boys, I tripped over my umbrella and I got a really nasty cut on my knee. My dad was home for lunch from the lumber yard. He picked the stones out of my cut and he bandaged me up. I still have the scar on my knee after 70 years. It was a while before I chased boys again. As I remember the interior of the school, upon entering at the left of the Little Red Schoolhouse, was a cloakroom. There was a small library for our books next to the old pump organ. The large schoolroom sported a pot-bellied wood stove in the center of the room, surrounded by several desks and chairs. The old organ that needed priming, like the old hand pump outside, required pumping with both feet to get the music going. Not the Lowry organ sounds of today, for sure, but it was our first introduction to formal music in the school. I often think of that old organ while visiting antique shops and sometimes spotting similar old musical instruments with their ornate and curvy designs and their musty, aged smell. The outhouse was in the rear of the building. Just as a footnote here, I found this in one of the old publications for folks that were born in 1939. The average price for a new house cost $3,850. A new car cost $700. A movie ticket was 25 cents. Postage stamp was 3 cents. And gas was 10 cents a gallon. We've come a long way, haven't we? Okay, besides the organ, I remember a large blackboard in the front of the room near the American flag, which we faithfully saluted each morning, and where we stood to be grilled with our multiplication tables. I cried one day because I had trouble learning my tables, and I couldn't go home for lunch. I was so bad in arithmetic, my dad would have to drill me each night what 7 times 6 equaled and 9 times 8. I always used to get the numbers mixed up. Maybe that's why I still have problems balancing my checkbook. My school teachers were Mrs. Elizabeth Maston of Hancock, Mass., who was a tall, kind teacher who always wore her gray hair braided and neatly pinned around her head. My second teacher there was another educator from Hancock, Augusta, called Gussie Whitman. She was more memorable to me. I recall her being able to teach arithmetic at the blackboard while instructing another at her desk in spelling, avoiding the paper airplanes we sometimes sailed past her, tending the pot-bellied wood stove in the center of the room on a winter day, and painting her nails, all at the same time. I think of her fondly as the queen of multitasking. While we were students of Gussie Whitman, she made sure we had a picnic at her home in Hancock on the last day of school, where we brown bagged our peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and we sat on her sprawling lawn at her big house for a fun-filled day. The day of the annual visit to our school from local Dr. Lawrence Green, with his satchel full of immunization needles for us kids, sent many of us scampering outside the schoolhouse to hide in the bushes. Another episode of the Little Red Schoolhouse was the memory of the outside swings. There were 2 huge sets of swings next to the school, made from iron frames and iron hooks on the top for fastening the chains and the seats. One day after school, I lingered before walking home, and I had the bright idea to shimmy up the pole and over to the handles to swing, because the chains and the seats were gone. I had watched the older kids do that at recess, and it looked like a challenge. After shimmying up and over to the handles on these high bars, I wondered how I could get down without breaking my legs. Everyone had gone home, so there was no one there to spot check or catch me when I jumped off. I was terrified. As a skinny 3rd grader, I don't remember how long I held on, but I think it was maybe my first experience praying to God for help. Finally, I mustered up enough courage to jump, and I was okay, but I never tried it again. There were about 20 students in the Garfield Little Red Schoolhouse when I attended kindergarten through 6th grade. And I was the smartest kid in my class until Gwen Robbins moved into town, joining us in the 6th grade. Gwen is still a good friend and lives near Boston. After completing our 6 years at Garfield, we boarded the school bus to New Lebanon Central School in Lebanon Springs, where the bus driver, Charlie Spencer, picked up kids from Hancock, Steventown, Garfield, Presbyterian Hill to West Street, Wyominok, and then on to New Lebanon. At that transition time, the students' parents in Steventown had a chance to which district they wanted for their children, Berlin Central School or New Lebanon, so both buses crisscrossed the town at that time. One of my sad memories was the flood of 1945, when the raging creek took a few lives and also part of our home, which was attached to the barn where we kids had played games and we made mud pies with the neighborhood kids. I remember my dad was the only one who stayed at our home that raging night, with our washing machine hauled out onto the front porch for safekeeping. Mom, my 5 siblings, and I stayed the night on higher ground with the Don Hall family across the street. On summer days, Margie Hall Smith and I liked to sit on the big rock near the road and record the different kinds of cars that went by. There were Studebakers, DeSotos, Plymouths, Chevys, Fords, Buicks, Pontiacs, and a few Model Ts and Nash cars back then. That was in the 40s and 50s. There was a great town spirit back then, and every family was either involved in the Grange, the 4-H, the youth group, the fire department, church activities, or softball games. Many locals worked at Sykes' store, McClintock Chevrolet, their farms, small businesses, mills, the railroads, garages, or for the highway department. Some folks drove to Pittsfield daily to work at the General Electric. We always helped each other as neighbors, shared rides, and never locked our doors. Besides ice skating on Griswold's Pond in North Steventown, where Carter and Barbara Griswold owned and operated a snack bar, everyone enjoyed the local softball game, sponsored by McClintock Chevrolet, and another sponsor, I believe, was the Ernest Reynolds team. Some of the players I remember include Cy Close, Ed C., Paul Sykes, Alan Sicily, Vic Lisi, Richard Crowbaugh, Sonny and Tom McVeigh, George Schmidt, Peter and Junior Sweener, Johnny Esposito, Ernie Lindsay, Ernie Beach, George Fitzgerald, and Bill and Bob McClintock. Doc Green was the faithful umpire. When we sat watching the game, it was usually on somebody's car fender. And when somebody got a hit, the car horns and the ooga horns would resound all over the town. I remember Rita Sykes, when engaged to Paul, passing around the baseball cap for donations for the town uniforms. My sisters and I walked about 2 miles to the ball game from our home on Monday nights, and sometimes we got a ride home on somebody's bicycle handlebars. Great memories, and everybody knew and loved his neighbors, or at least liked them. As kids, we always had chores to do at home, picking berries for pies, helping with laundry, and gathering wood for the stove every winter day. At about 12 years of age, I picked strawberries for Irene and Al Silvernail, Mabel Palmer, and Gus Johnson. On good picking days, we earned 7 cents a quart. Sometimes we could pick 20 quarts a day. The good big berries usually hid under the straw in the dew of the morning. Gus, who was also our milkman and the local judge, delivered our daily milk in glass bottles. He would take the berries on picking days to market in Troy before 1 o'clock. We didn't mind getting up at 6 a.m. during the summer school break because it was an opportunity to earn our own money. It taught us as children the good work ethic, and we usually earned enough to afford a week of church camp at Sky Farm in the Adirondacks. It cost $21 a week. We also used our free Saturday mornings tying up collected newspapers and magazines from neighbors to earn money for youth activities at the Federated Church. We did this task at what is now the Heritage Center. Our minister from the Federated Church was Reverend Hannay at the time, and would transport the Tide papers to Troy to help finance youth activities in his green Studebaker. The former Methodist Church was also a teen hangout in the latter 50s, when the young couples in town would take turns chaperoning us teens. We played records and danced, enjoyed ping pong and read comic books, and enjoyed refreshments, thanks to these folks who volunteered their time for us. I love to gaze at the old tin ceilings at the Heritage Center when I have the opportunity to visit. I also took piano lessons from Ruth Yale, who lived at the Mary Atwater House in Garfield. My lessons cost $1. I loved swinging on the wooden porch at their home, which I could longingly see from across the brook and back of our house. My sisters and I were hired by Ernie Reynolds to bring the cows back from grazing across the brook to his barn in the evenings. He paid us 4 or 5 cents a day. We were barefoot most of the time anyway, so it was fun for us. Our games outside were kick the can, hide and seek, and dress up. My dad used to let me beat him at Chinese checkers on occasion. My mom was always home, tending us kids, braiding our hair, cooking, cleaning house, and shopping from the Spiegels or Montgomery Ward catalogs at Christmas time. All we kids had to carry water across the road in pails each day, since we had no indoor plumbing. Because we were happy, we didn't know that we were poor. We had an inside ice box, which required an ice man to visit weekly, along with the Raleigh man, the Renton Bakery man, when bread was 7 cents a loaf, a meat man named Arnold Gardner, and the Blendwell beverage man, and some other peddlers. We had a summer garden and a garden called a Victory Garden, planted in the shape of a V. Our grocery list was walked to John Whitman's store weekly by one of us kids, and the groceries were delivered to our home that evening. When we needed socks or sundial shoes, Sykes' store was right next to Whitman's. and Sykes' store sold groceries, dry goods, hardware, and appliances. As children, we spent our Christmas money at Sykes' for everybody in the family except for our catalog items. We liked the pink and white marshmallow cookies at John Whitman's store that he kept in a glass case, and also the strawberry sundaes next door at Sismare's ice cream store, where we paid 25 cents. It was worth the 2-mile walk each week for these treats. One special memory I had was riding the Rutland Railroad excursion on its last run to Vermont, where the ladies all dressed up in their Steventown petticoats and bonnets, and the men wore their top hats and their striped shirts with the bow ties. The last run was in 1948 when I was 9 years old, but it was a special treat for me. Some of us teenagers volunteered to spot airplanes for civil defense in the late 40s. We were all very patriotic and we were taught to love our flag and our country. We used the old schoolhouse, which is now this very present library building, for our 2-hour weekly commitment. Theo Holt, Janito, and I had the Saturday afternoon duty, and we would call headquarters upon spotting a plane overhead, with a plane description, the probable altitude, and by quoting, "Bravo, Nectar, 33 Black." I sometimes surprised myself by remembering all these little details. We enjoyed our patriotic duty until 2 young rebels from town dropped by one day, and they started busting up the place by throwing around the world globe that was on the teacher's desk and causing a lot of trouble for us. I won't name those 2 boys since I don't know if any of their families still live in town, but both of us ran across the street to Helen Kenyon's home for help, where she called the local police to apprehend the rascals. A memorable day indeed at this very same building. When I was 12 years old and considered mature enough to babysit for the Atwater kids, they became like family to me. I had one of the best times of my childhood life when John and Lois Atwater invited me to share their lakeside camp at Lake Bomazine, Vermont one year. I was babysitting the kids. I think I spent most of the week in the boat learning to fish and row the boat and enjoying the swimming rather than taking care of the kids. I also babysat the Carter Griswold kids, the West Rathbun kids, and the Edmund Demick kids in town. The going rate was 50 cents an hour. My dad worked at the local lumber yard at Cal and Elsie Atwater's across the bridge in Garfield. It was fun to run barefoot through the cool, wet sawdust at the mill when we were kids, and visiting Aunt Elsie and Blanche Coffee in the evenings. That same Garfield Bridge went cruising down the river during the 1945 flood. I'm not sure it was on a Sunday afternoon, as the song goes, but it was a terrifying time for us as children. My dad walked to work each day because we didn't own a family car. On occasion, on evenings, he would borrow Cal Atwater's lumber truck, and we piled into the back of the truck for a trip to South Steventown to pick trailing arbutus. Dad didn't have a license, but even though it was illegal to drive without one, not even our local state trooper, George Fitzgerald, would hold it against him. Also, our motive was right to pick the forbidden flowers that smell so sweet. We placed them in coffee cans and we gave them to Mom on Mother's Day. It was not like we were making moonshine or anything like that. Blanche Coffee first introduced us to her favorite gingerbread with a new invention called Cool Whip, which we enjoyed. We didn't have to take the cream off the top of our Gus Johnson milk and whip it with sugar. It was already done for us and available at Sykes' store where she worked. Blanche loved all us kids, played the piano at the Federated Church, and introduced us to the brand new library in town, where I can remember the refreshing scent of the fresh varnished wood on the new walls of the library where the bookshelves were built. She encouraged me in the joy of reading, and I loved the Zane Grey mystery, or the Westerns, The Black Beauty, and the Carolyn Queen mystery series. I was 10 years old when Blanche was the new proud librarian. In later years, the small building was used by one of my bosses, the late Lawrence C. Connors, as a law office on Saturdays. Larry also maintained his law office on 2nd Street in Troy when he was the Rensselaer County Public Defender in Troy, where I was part of his staff as a legal secretary back in the 1980s. I submitted a poem I wrote about him to a legal magazine, and I was paid $25 for the poem, entitled My Boss. It was published in the Barrister magazine. The poem is included in my poetry book, and I thought that I would end with reading that particular poem, which is on page 190. Thought maybe you'd get a kick out of it. My boss says the following. Good morning. Coffee ready? Norma, would you come in, please? Do an order. Type this motion. My boss says, would you get me some cigarettes, dear? Take this to county court. Deliver the subpoena to the jail and adjourn my cases for tonight. My boss likes attractive women, sailing his yacht, sharp attorneys, a good steak, winning a case, and getting an acquittal. My boss expects cooperation from the courts, sober employees, phones answered promptly, and trouble with a certain judge. My boss asked for plenty of office space, trouble from the district attorney, a missing file, and 2 bagels with cream cheese. So I thought I would share that with you. Just got a couple other little remarks before I introduce our speakers. I was the youngest of 5 girls. I have a younger brother living in Hudson, Doug Jr. 2 of my sisters married boys with a local connection. My sister Shirley Williams married Alan Hyatt Getty. Sadly, Alan died shortly after they were married in a farm accident on East Road in 1959. My eldest sister Dorothy married Wyatt Haley of West Steventown. They are all sadly missed. My brother Doug and I of the Doug Williams family are the only siblings left, but we have great memories growing up as a family in Steventown. If time permits, I'll share some of my other poems later from Tassels of Blue. It will be available for purchase after the presentations. A portion of the book will be given to the Memorial Library. Thanks again for allowing me to share a few of my stories. Now we'll hear from some other locals, their tales of the only Steventown on earth.